Well, look what we have. Another episode of quite possibly the worst podcast on the internet. I am not a federal agent, and you are listening to the Negative Space Podcast. Today, hold on, let me take a sip of my Vita Life Organic Kombucha Berry Nirvana. Sparkling fermented tea with 5 probiotic cultures. Today, we are going to be talking about some lore from my home state. Now, some of you guys may be thinking, well, why hasn't there been a video or an episode in a while? Well, I'll tell you, I had a lot of stuff going on in my personal life that was just kind of driving me nuts. And the way my brain works is outside of my day-to-day life. I can only pay attention to like one big thing, outside of the day-to-day at one time. So I had some family stuff going on, and that was my big thing. And now it's just my favorite time of the sports year. I'm going to be just straight up. I'm so distracted from doing anything with this because compared to the general public, I am just disgustingly informed about the NFL draft. I am a huge nerd because I'm a huge college football fan, and the NFL is okay, whatever. But I love the draft. There is so much that goes into it. I also may or may not have come close to ruining a sponsorship for one of my favorite draft podcasts, but that's a completely different topic for a different time. It'd be cool if I could find an overlap between like scouting this event and conspiracy theories, so I could just like naturally blend them together when it comes to this time. But the only sort of overlap I found is Tyler Owens, I believe he's a safety from Texas Tech, was asked what conspiracy theory he thinks is real, and he is firmly planted in the birds aren't real camp, which, if you don't know about that, the birds aren't real, I think, was started as a joke that, the birds are all government drones, whatever. I don't remember the exact this or that details. It's whatever. It's from like what? That started back in 2019, maybe. But anyway, before I get into the good stuff about my home state of Wisconsin and just crazy stuff, crazy lore from there. By the way, I was originally going to do my 2 home states because I lived for an extended period of time in 2 different places, but there's just so much in Wisconsin, and I kind of skim over some things because there is a good amount that I just didn't really think there would be space for a whole nother state. But I'm thinking maybe that'd be like a cool sort of series, is just lore and history and weird conspiracy things and just maybe unsolved crime from different states, and then expand that once all 50 are done to different countries. I don't know. If that sounds cool, tell me. That would be great. Leave a comment below. I'm going to try to farm engagement here. Tell me, please. I want to make content that people are going to listen to and also that I enjoy. I enjoy making. But anyway, before that, I'm going to ramble a little bit for something I found that is completely unrelated. But, this has been a pattern where I just ramble about whatever for like 10 minutes just to kind of warm up, get myself, back in podcasting shape. It's tough to mentally transition to saying nonsense all day to saying nonsense into a microphone in my closet in Los Angeles. So, let's get into something that I've decided I'm going to speak very carefully about this because I know other people have talked about this and gotten absolutely nuked off of YouTube. So even if I didn't talk about it carefully, I have like 5 overall subscribers. Like I can fly under the radar well enough, but I'm just not going to risk it because if I get nuked, I'm just not restarting. Like, I'm just not. I don't think I could do that. But anyway, let's talk about a potential preventative solution to a disease that may have a cure to it being covered up by the medical industrial complex. Okay, so I'm kind of an esoteric health type of guy, all right? Like, seriously, ask my mom. I was on about like the harms of seed oils back since like late 2019, like before it became even fringe, and now it's sort of like creeping its way into the mainstream a little bit, but it's still really on the fringes. I was into that, and if you don't know, maybe I'll make it like a topic on a future episode. But basically, seed oils outside of things like olive oil and avocado oil, what they do is they set off the balance of omega-6s and omega-3s in your body, and they shoot up your omega-6 levels, and that causes a lot of problems with inflammation and chronic pain, and it brings on a different bout of diseases because your body is too busy fighting the inflammation that it's susceptible to other diseases. So keeping your omega-6 and omega-3s balanced is what's crucial. So what I do is, because when they oxygenate, I think that's a word, I'll just roll with that. You know what? I'll just roll with it. When they oxygenate, I should have prepped before, but whatever. We do the pod on the pot. That's what starts to cause those problems. So if you take some sort of antioxidant, like I take vitamin E almost every night, and that kills any free radicals in your bloodstream. So it doesn't completely solve the problem, but it at least takes a step towards minimizing the damage. So anyway, like, I've been in this whole esoteric health world for a while. I've tried keto, paleo, carnivore, all those different things. I've done intermittent fasting. I've been around the block with like the strange, I say strange, quote unquote, strange ideas in terms of, I guess, diets and lifestyles. So I am, with a lot of these things, like, I'm a believing skeptic. Like, I want to try it out on myself before I can really recommend it to anyone else. And that way I know, what it does to me. It's probably going to do different things to different people, for whatever. But I prefer to do these things by myself, for myself, before I really recommend it. So I can't recommend anything that I'm about to say, but I am saying that I've heard a lot of people talk about it in very protected corners of the internet, so they don't get wiped out, and there might be something to this. So again, I'm a believing skeptic, let's just say. So there's this fella from a long time ago, the 60s, Dr. John Richardson Sr. He's an MD who graduated from Rochester Medical School. He came across a little something with help from his friend Dr. Ernst T. Krebs. And what he came across was the benefits of eating apricot seeds. I say apricot. Okay, it's just where I'm from. All right, apricot seeds. By the way, I think offhand once that I was going to do this whole episode in a very thick Midwest accent. I don't know if I can pull that off. I'm not ready for that. Anyway, that was a tangent. Anyway, apricot seeds. I'm probably going to go back and forth, and it's going to drive me nuts. Apricot seeds. So why? What? How did he come across these things? Well, the family cat had started to develop cancer, and so Richardson was researching, like, how can I get rid of this? I think this is before chemotherapy was like a big thing, all that good stuff, and he was working with his buddy Krebs trying to figure out what was happening, and the cat was given like a 10% chance to live. Well, they started feeding it vitamin B17, which is Lyatril, which is purified amygdaline, which is in apricot seeds. The vitamin B17 supplements helped extend the cat's life 5 more years. So probably when it would have died without cancer at all. Now, kind of the nitty gritty of this is really outlined in a book written by G. Edward Griffin, who was a close friend of Richardson Sr. And it's full of info on why B17 works and why you won't find out about it because, you know, Big Pharma has their grubby little mitts and everything trying to keep patients sick so they can get more money out of them, you know, that sort of thing. And I think this whole, like, preventative cancer solutions thing is really interesting because you'll hear things about people going on an alkaline diet or fasting and basically starving the cancer cells out. And I don't know, I haven't looked too deep into it, but just based off some sort of surface level reading around and prodding around and personal testimonies, there seem to be generally positive results. But of course I can't speak to that fully. This is something that, you know, if you, God forbid, were facing this situation, look into it yourself. You know, don't trust some fool sitting in his closet in Los Angeles talking about this. All right, like, go look into it yourself. But anyway, you know, curing these things, it is bad for business. So that's why people are like, oh yeah, there's probably a cure, but they're just hiding it for us. It's kind of like, now this is a complete separate tangent, but it peeves me that there hasn't been any talk about this at all since this discovery. So late in 2022 or 2023, American and Italian scientists discovered that Roman concrete was fortified with these things called lime clasts. So what lime clasts do is every time that the concrete is exposed to water, the lime clasts basically help the concrete heal itself so it remains strong and intact. And I'm here driving on these crappy LA roads thinking, where are my tax dollars going? Because they sure ain't going to fixing these potholes. And I'm like, why don't we just put lime clasts in the concrete that we use to patch up our roads, and then eventually when they need to get repaved, put the lime clasts in that concrete, so every time it rains and the street basically floods, it'll be good by the time it all clears up. But no, that doesn't allow for a profit cycle, so it won't happen. But anyway, back to the apricot seeds. There was a little bit of pushback with like, but cyanide poisoning, what's gonna happen? No, I'm sorry, just no. Cyanide poisoning is not a reality. It kind of is, but not in the way that you would think. Okay, so in the 70s, the FDA, because I think this is before corruption really started to set in too much. The FDA tried to break down Lytril into both cyanide and benzaldehyde in a lab, and they couldn't until they exposed it to a cancer cell, and a cancer cell was the thing that actually divided it. So one guy, what he did, he had cancer, he started eating apricot seeds, and then he got cyanide poisoning, but he just got treated for the cyanide poisoning and was fine after that. So, you know, I'm not saying that it's going to be a kick in the pants either way, but there's still something to it. And I think, you know, of course, I'm just going to reiterate this. I cannot recommend this at all. Like, I just can't. But it's interesting to read about nonetheless. It probably has some sort of preventative cause, given how uncommon Lytril and B17 is in the modern diet. Like, you just really don't see it in much. It's maybe in like beef liver, but you know, who really is eating much liver these days? You know, I've tried to when I can, but liver is just not something that people eat on the regular, even though it's freaking awesome for you. Liver is amazing for you. I probably should eat it more often. I'll just emphasize how much of an esoteric food guy I have been over my life. You know what I did for a while? I would freeze liver in like ice cube trays. I would freeze liver, so I had little liver cubes, and I would just drop them in smoothies. And yeah, it would taste like strawberries mixed with iron, but it was good. It's good. Like, I felt good. Liver is fantastic for you, so that is something I can recommend. Go eat some liver. You know how I've had it before? That's really good. I don't like cooking it too much because I'm afraid of, killing off too many nutrients. But I think if you dry it out over a long period of time, it still retains a lot of its nutrient density. But how I've had it before is dried and sort of in a crisp form, but also breaded and kind of pan seared with some onions. That is pretty freaking good liver. Anyway, let's get into some lore from the state of Wisconsin. I'm going to take another sip of my Vitalife Organic Kombucha Berry Nirvana Sparkling Fermented Tea with 5 probiotic cultures. Non-alcoholic, contains a trace amount of alcohol below 0.5%. 1 billion CFU probiotics at the time of bottling. I don't know what that means, but I got this at Aldi. I think this is an Aldi brand. Oh, it's got the Aldi twice as nice guarantee. So yeah, it is an Aldi brand. That's sick. So this first thing we're going to talk about kind of hits close to home, literally, because it happened about 15 minutes away from where I grew up. And I was near the age of the girls who were involved in this horrible event, let's just call it. So I don't even know how to begin with this. Like, I'm gonna keep it lighthearted, but this is insanely dark. Whew. Y'all ever heard of Slenderman? Okay, if not, look it up. Slenderman was like this big, like, it originated from creepypastas, which are like a horror version of copypastas, which are basically just like this memes that you copy and paste and put everywhere mindlessly. I don't know. It's more like a 2010s, early 2000s internet thing than it really is right now. But actually one that I did see relatively recently that I thought was kind of funny was... Now, I'm not a basketball guy at all, but just the concept of this is hilarious. Should the Detroit Pistons of the NBA kill 5 of their players to trigger an NBA disaster draft? That's funny to me. I think that's funny. That's just some good old regular copy pasta, not a creepy pasta. So Slenderman, this is one of these creepypasta things. If you look it up, it's like a 20-minute read. I was never into that, but it's all about this tall, gangly, white demon-looking dude in a suit, and he leaves cute little notes everywhere for you to find. And like, I don't know if he wants you to find them or if he doesn't want you to find them, and if you find them, he tries to come and get you. I don't know. There have been a few movies made about it. There's been a game. There's just a lot of content around it. But to me, it's kind of like an early version of the Mandela Catalog, which, if you know me, you've probably heard me talk about before. If you're into internet horror, give the Mandela Catalog a watch. If you're into horror in general, give the Mandela Catalog a watch. I tried, but I couldn't get through all of it. I got through through 3 episodes and was so disturbed that the rest of it, I watched some dude react to it and give me information about it because I was curious, because it's a very interesting concept. But there was no way I was watching all of that. Like, I still get flashbacks from some of the imagery, and it just, whoo. If you don't like horror at all, do not watch it. It's basically all about demons entering our world through digital technology and like this whole reclaiming of domain over the earth at creation. That whole sort of thing plays off of like concepts in Paradise Lost by John Milton, and overall just Christian themes that freak me out to no end. I swear, it's gonna make me sound like a total pansy, but you know what? This is what good horror, good fiction in general does, is that it toes the line. It makes you toe the line between, okay, I know this is fake, and oh boy, what if this is real? And oh, this is fake, oh, this is real. I think that's what a lot of good fiction does. This fiction, the Mandela Catalog, not Slenderman. I'm just going on a complete tangent again, but you know what? That's podcasting, baby. That's the showbiz. The Mandela Catalog, I got so freaked out by just the concept of it that for several nights, I moved my TV into my bathroom just so it wasn't in the same room I was sleeping in. Like, that's how creeped out by that all I was. But anyway, I'm not much of a horror guy after that. I never really fancied myself one too much, but I will still watch, occasionally indulge in something a little unsettling. I would say like Petscop. That, oh my gosh, that whole thing is a trip. Because it's got a cool story, so that's why I like it. Anyways, so in like the 2010s era, I guess, Slenderman was really growing amongst the youths, like these things do, and a couple of impressionable middle school girls started to believe he was talking to them. It's crazy that kids do this sort of thing, and they end up getting institutionalized, but then we let them make life-altering decisions just because they feel like it that they will never be able to come back from. That's cool, speaking of Big Pharma. But anyways, now, these girls were at the age where they definitely weren't thinking with nuance, and before it became apparent to them, like, fully the difference between fiction and reality, I think a lot of people would hear that and think, well, what are you talking about? They're in middle school. I think we all underestimate how stupid we are when we're in middle school, when we're like 12, 13, 14. Like, we're all like really dumb. Anyway, so these girls, Anissa Weier and Morgan Geyser, I'm going to be honest, those two names are still kind of eerie to me to this day. Like, all these years later, because I know of what happened here, it's just, it's another thing that just gives me the good old heebie-jeebies. They got really into Slenderman, and they sort of saw him as a god that needed appeasing. Of course, this fictional character that has no basis in reality, they started believing was talking to them, and believed was real. So what they did, this is just so cold-blooded, man. They started making friends with this girl, Peyton Leutner. I think I'm pronouncing it right, Leutner. They became her friend, for a few months, they started talking it up, 5 months about. And then they're like, hey, you want to come over for a sleepover at, I think it was Morgan's house? And Peyton was like, sure, we're friends. We've been friends for 5 months. This whole time, they had this plan, this 5-month period. This was premeditated. I was going to finish that sentence, but I'm just not. This was all premeditated, okay? I'm not going to give it away while I'm in the middle of the story. They said, while they're at the sleepover, oh, you know what would be fun? Let's walk out to this park and go into the forest. And the freaking park was like, I want to say like, oh my gosh, at least 3 miles away. So they walked 3 miles to this park. I'm like, yeah, let's go out in the forest at night. It's going to be fun. Oh my gosh. Anissa and Morgan stabbed Peyton 19 times while they dragged her out into the woods, basically. She was just under the complete assumption that this was going to be like a friendly sleepover, and she ended up literally getting stabbed in the back 19 times, and she was left for dead, basically. Somehow, like, by the grace of God, she survived. She basically crawled to the side of the road and waited for someone to drive by, and eventually she was able to get to the hospital and recover, and she kind of openly started talking about it more in 2019, but now, kind of wishes to keep a low profile, which I totally get. Holy cow. This is like the biggest thing that happened in the state since, the Packers won the Super Bowl. Anissa and Morgan, they would both receive mental evaluations, and Morgan specifically would be diagnosed with early onset schizophrenia, which explains why she thought Slenderman was talking to her. Because of that, she was sent indefinitely to the Winnebago Mental Institute in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. You're going to hear a bunch of funny names that sound kind of like that, Winnebago and Oshkosh. But anyway, Anissa she would also end up there, but she took a plea deal in 2017 where she would plead guilty to attempted second-degree intentional homicide and being an accomplice to a crime with the use of a dangerous weapon. When she was, I guess, what's the word? I don't know. When she was locked up in the loony bin, she was labeled with a specification that she would be under state supervision until 2039, and she was released in 2021, so that's cool. Well, what's interesting is they were both like equally involved in this, but you can find the police interrogation film online, and Anissa just totally threw Morgan under the bus. Is kind of funny, but also not, because it's a horrible situation. But this one still is crazy to me to think about. You know, I was of similar age to these girls, and I couldn't have imagined being involved in that in any sense. Just, I couldn't have imagined that happening at my school, although after several bomb threats in a row, like I think 7th and 8th grade, we had someone writing a bomb threat, and I think I know who it was, and I think they were kind of shipped off to a loony bin, kind of like this. But anyway, it was still so just weird. And honestly, paying attention to this case then is probably why I'm into sort of, I don't know, weird, dark, conspiratorial, paranormal things now. Like, this case probably did a number on me, and I didn't even realize it. But anyway, that story sucked. Not that it's a bad story, it's just heavy, and awful things happened to it. Happened in it, and I really skimmed through that. I'm gonna be honest. There's so much I could have included, and maybe there's more information for another time, but I seriously doubt it. Like, I've said more than enough about it. If you really want to go in and get into the minutia of it, that's an SAT word, minutia. Just look up like the Slenderman stabbings. There are probably a billion YouTube, video essays on it. It's really, really, really insane. Whew. How about something a little more lighthearted then? Too bad. The next case we've got here it's unsolved and very perplexing, but might be a little simpler than we think. I'm not too sure, but it's still strange nonetheless. It's an important part of the state's history, and I found it strangely compelling. We're gonna stay kind of in the southeast Wisconsin region, away from, I guess that was Waukesha that the Slenderman stuff happened. So we're gonna go over east a little bit to Milwaukee. Again, a while ago. We're going back in time to the unsolved murder of Ida Lowry. So Mrs. Lowry, she was a 76-year-old woman who lived a very eccentric life, let's just say. After her husband passed away in the 50s, all this stuff takes place in the 1960s. By this time, she was living in the Hotel Royal, which, side note, why is every hotel that is just a complete dump, like named, the Hotel Royal, or King's Palace Hotel, or something like that? No, if you want to go to a nice hotel, I guess you get one named after someone, like the Marriott, whatever. She would spend most of her days while she was living at the Hotel Royal kind of raccooning through dumpsters and other garbage, pulling out old clothes and little trinkets that she found amusing, that sort of thing. That's kind of why she was eccentric. She often dressed in heavy layers and mismatched patterns and colors. This is probably all from the clothes that she found in other people's refuse. But overall, she kind of had the reputation of being an odd duck, but overall just a harmless character, However, I say, however, like she committed the crime. No, she was the victim of a crime. On April 23rd, 1960, just after midnight, Lowry was heard screaming from an alleyway by Edwin Smith, who was driving by at the time. Her clothes, when Edwin got to her in the alley, her clothes were covered in blood, and when he tried to pick her up, she just screamed out in agony. Smith would call for the police, who would get her to a nearby hospital, and she would unfortunately pass an hour later. So she met just a horrible, untimely demise. There were all sorts of signs of abuse on Ida's body. I will leave that open to the listener to interpret how you may. And all she could get out about her assailant was that he was a big white man who worked at the bridge. Well, I'm not sure how many of you know this, but that narrows it down very little. There were and still are a lot of big white men in Milwaukee, Wisconsin who work by the bridge, especially heavily intoxicated big white men. Now, police could find nothing of use in the alleyway where the crime took place, nor did anything turn up when asking those at the Hotel Royal if anything was amiss. Lowry often left at odd hours of the night, anybody who has done any amount of dumpster diving will tell you, that's when all the best stuff is. It's where I got the very chair I'm sitting on now. Side tangent again, I'm just going on a billion of those while I'm getting back into this whole podcasting thing. The best part of living in a nice apartment area is that when people have furniture that they just can't keep because they don't have space for it while they're moving, they often just leave it by the dumpster, and it's good and it's clean and it's intact and it gets the job done. So I take it. I got a lot of furniture like that. This chair, I got another chair just like it. I got a few nesting tables and some other things. Honestly, take a look. I found some bar stools at my last place. Like, go look around. That's another thing I can recommend to you. Look around. There might be something nice that's hidden and you're missing. But anyways, back to the horrors beyond human comprehension. The police would stop by Lowry's sister's house, who didn't provide much since she hadn't seen her in weeks. Ida often visited, but recently she just stopped. They talked to many subjects, none of which turned up any answers. There was one guy who they thought might have had some sort of lead tied to him, and he actually offered himself up. He claimed he was prone to long periods of alcohol-induced amnesia, and was currently being held on a drunk and disorderly charge for attempting to do something very similar not too long ago. Unfortunately, the lab analysis of his clothes came back negative, so that trail went cold. But this is where it gets odd. While searching for the possible assailant, they conducted a search of Ida Lowry's room at the Hotel Royal. It kind of had some of your traditional hoarder things. It was covered in garbage and worthless investment notes and just stuff like that. But it had 2 safe deposit boxes. The first one they cracked open and was empty. The second one, however, held $17,000 in cash. Now that's a little over $178,000 in today's money. She just had this sitting at her disposal while barely being able to pay her $10 a month rent, which today is about $105, if that puts it in a better perspective. Holy cow, if I could find a place in Los Angeles that charged $105 for rent, I don't care if it's a Roach Coach, I might live there. Holy cow. But anyway, actually I do care if it's Roach Coach. Roaches are like the one thing, like, no, stop. I can't deal with that. Anyway, what's going on here? What are we missing? Well, for one thing, lab testing in the 1960s was shoddy at best, so they could have had the guy, but because their processes weren't advanced enough, he could have just as easily gotten away. But with the added information of the cash that Lowry was sitting on, is it possible that the attack was about that? Perhaps family member was looking for inheritance or just wanted the totality of what was in that safe. Obviously getting the whole of the money didn't work, but assuming something like Lowry's scream scared the assailant off when it was supposed to be like a silent takedown, but then that doesn't quite explain the nature of the attack being as violent and let's just say quote unquote charged as it was. Again, if you read into it, you'll know what I mean, but I will leave that up to your interpretation. And one of the stranger things about this case, too, that I ran into is that there aren't a whole lot of people discussing it online. Like, there are a few articles here and there, but, like, unsolved crime on Reddit, like, there was one post and one reply to it. People just don't know too much about this case, I think, outside of Wisconsin. Overall, I would guess that the attack had nothing to do with the money, and Lori was suffering from some sort of dementia or Alzheimer's, and that's why she was just sitting on it. She was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But that doesn't quite put a pin on any motive for an attack. It obviously makes a lot of sense that the money would have been a motive, but who would have known about it? Her sister, another family member, maybe? I'm not too sure. If we use like her sister as an example, and I'm not saying that her sister definitely did it, but perhaps she saw that the life that Ida was living and knew about her stash of money. Immediate thoughts of, I could be putting that money to good use could have created some sort of falling out between the two, hence why they didn't see each other for a while, and her sister let this resentment grow, and she eventually hired someone to take out Ida. And maybe the assailant got a little too carried away. Now, keep in mind that any sort of charged nature of this attack couldn't be akin to something like, let's say, Jack the Ripper, maybe, where it's a young, attractive woman that this is happening to, because Ida was very old by this point. I think she was 76 when this happened. So she was just kind of ending or nearing the end of her natural life, or kind of coming close to it as it was. And I don't see how that, connects quite there. But who knows? Maybe she was living a strange double life and this was one end catching up to the other. Maybe, like, if that was the case, she had two safes because one was a decoy. You open up one and there's nothing in it. You think, oh, drat, there's probably nothing in the other one, so you don't even bother with that one. Who knows? Maybe she was planning some old switcheroo ruse with it. I don't know. If you've seen a heist movie, you probably know what that means. Overall, I got no clue what the purpose of any of this was, and to this day, it's unsolved. Nobody knows, and I think that's probably why it lost a lot of steam, amongst people trying to solve it, is that it's just been cold for so long that we just don't know, and the possibilities seem almost completely limitless. Like, maybe she was living a double life. This was the 60s when CIA propaganda was a big thing, and who knows, maybe she could have been like an MK Ultra victim, and that led to some strange behavior. I don't know. Literally any proposal that is rooted in some sort of reality is just as good as any other proposal to why any of this happened. So that was the case of Ida Lowry. Very interesting. I'm going to take another sip of my Vitalife Organic Kombucha Berry Nirvana Sparkling Fermented Tea with 5 probiotic cultures. Non-alcoholic, contains a trace amount of alcohol below 0.5%. It tastes good because I know that if I didn't like it, I would have my item replaced and my money refunded because of the Aldi Twice as Nice guarantee. And they're still wondering if they should sponsor me. Get a grip, bub. I'm sorry, Aldi, I didn't mean to sound mean to you. I love you. Just please, if you sponsor me, I guarantee you the numbers will start coming in. I will be the only podcast sponsored by a grocery chain. Okay, so where are we now? I lost my spot in the script. Oh yeah, I totally forgot about this. I wrote this down in the script. I wrote this down, so I'm just going to say it now. Might as well. The total and utter lack of information or a good motive as to why this happened makes it interesting and leaves a lot of room for interpretation. Here's a totally unslick call to action. If you have any ideas, leave a comment, please. I could use the engagement. So true, past me. Okay, next paragraph. All right. Where are we? Okay. Whew. We're not getting lighthearted yet. I promise we will. This is another unsolved. This is another cold case that is kind of sad, but important to the state's lore. Okay? Just bear with me. I know some of you probably like this. Some of you probably hate it. I don't know when the timestamp is going to be for when this is done, but just skip around. And once I get to the city that may or may not have existed, when you hear me talking about that, that's when you know it's all downhill from there. All right? All right. So this next case, it has some similarities with the Ida Lowry story, because at this point it's going on basically 100 years of being cold. That's insane, and I doubt it's ever going to get solved. But the 100-year anniversary of the case of Buddy Schumacher. So Arthur Buddy Schumacher was an 8-year-old boy in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. Another one of those funny names. You know, you got Wauwatosa, you got Sheboygan, you got Ashwaubenon, Oshkosh, Oconomowoc, Waukesha, Kenosha. You know, all those fun names. Anyway, he was from Wauwatosa, who one day left his house to catch a train with some of his friends to get to a swimming hole that they liked on a particularly hot day. This is an 8-year-old doing this, but Schumacher's parents were aware and thought nothing of it. Apparently this was a common occurrence. And let me tell you, summer days in Wisconsin get pretty hot because it's also almost always over 100% humidity too. So it can be like walking through soup. So it makes sense that they'd want to go to some nice swimming hole. But this was, you know, it seems crazy, but, you know, this was, the 1920s, specifically 1925, you know, the space between the First World War and the Second, you know, just a wildly different time. So, like, I guess the ideas of just letting your kids go out like that were different. It's probably, you know, I know is way different, like, in the 80s and the 90s to what it is now, too. So I can only imagine how different it was in the 20s. But Buddy, of course, would never make it home. Curious as to where their son was, you know, like parents generally are, the Schumacher parents would question his friends who claimed to have not seen him for most of the day. They lost track of him somewhere between the train station and the swimming hole. You know, maybe this is why you don't let your 8-year-old kids go out and just meander without any parent supervision, because apparently none of them thought to stop and look for Buddy. Now, there was some sort of hope because Buddy had family nearby and on the way. And this was like a 15-mile train ride. So maybe he had just stopped to see them. Unfortunately, that rabbit trail turned up empty. The boys themselves weren't too helpful either. Being confused 8-year-olds, they each gave basically completely different accounts of what happened. And when they did, one story settled on being chased into the forest by a man from a nearby quarry, and another one that switched to a man trying to follow them from the train station to the swimming hole. Now, this is where it really started to explode. The running story was that the boys were under attack by a homeless man. Wauwatosa at the time was known for its robust transportation system, which drew a lot of homeless people in that area. You know, if you're homeless, why you don't just head south where it's warm all the time, you know, that's beyond me, but here we are. Since the running description of the man was that he was, you know, transient, the local homeless population started basically being thrown into the fire of, you know, the witch hunt and accusations and stuff like that. Everyone thought that they were responsible for the disappearance of, this innocent 8-year-old boy. They were often cussed out, pelted with stones, and sometimes just arrested en masse. But as time passed, it became clear that the boys were making things up that they thought sounded cool. I guess it's his homies looking out for each other. Hey, if I die and nobody knows what happened, come up with a cool story like I was fighting a giant or something. Not that I was being chased by a homeless man. That's a little too tame. Especially if I'm a fully grown man. Like, don't do that. But anyway, a little after that, in September, a man searching for mushrooms would stumble across Buddy's body. It had horrible signs of mutilation. Again, kind of similar to what happened to Ida. I will leave that up to the listener's interpretation as to what type of mutilation that was. And he had a handkerchief stuffed down his throat. Part of what's strange is that it looks like Buddy was on his way home based on the position of his body. He was 4 feet from a very well-traveled footpath and a mile from his parents' house. Just a mile. So that all convoluted things a whole lot. Did he get lost on the way there and just know how to walk back home? Like, did he just jump off the train at some point and decide that he wanted to go see his family again? Like, what happened? While the status of his body was rather gruesome, it gave the police a route to follow. If they could find the owner of the handkerchief, they probably had their killer. There was a small A embroidered onto the corner, but both Buddy, Arthur Buddy Schumacher, and Art, his father, were ruled out previously as to being associated with the A on this handkerchief. Now, this is where the police turned their attention towards Edward Freeland. You'd think, well, the thing had an A on it. Why Edward Freeland? And my answer to you would be, I have no clue. These are local police in the 1920s. Maybe A did stand for Art and they went back on that, but I didn't see any records of that. So, great, guys. Bang up job. Freeland would be picked out of a lineup by 2 of the 3 boys who were with Buddy at the time, so police really thought they had their man. On top of that, he was already being held in a local correctional facility. So they started building their case against him. 2 of the boys said that they went for a walk with him and he, quote, mistreated them, which I don't know what that means, why they would go for a walk with him in the first place. What? And he also Edward revealed that when he was young, he was kicked in the head by a horse. Meaning that he would often forget a lot of things that he's done. So he said it was entirely possible that he killed Buddy, but he just didn't remember and wasn't necessarily in control when he did it. Now, I say all these things and it makes you think, wow, this Edward Freeland dude is probably not a great guy. He was very well known in this correctional facility for good behavior, and like he slept with his Bible under his pillow. He was that sort of guy. He wanted to behave in this facility, but sometimes he just lost control. Probably some sort of like what we now know as CTE, but just from a very early age. News of this conviction of Edward spread to Edward's brother in Illinois, who traveled northward to hire an attorney to prove his brother's innocence. I'm getting to the point where I'm starting to not speak so good no mo. During this time, the handkerchief that became central to the case, it went missing. It went missing, and people were caught up in a panic, like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? The freaking handkerchief that is like the key to this case went missing. Well, ironically enough, they found that someone had placed it in a safe for safekeeping, and it wasn't actually lost. That has nothing to do with the story. It was just kind of a funny note. The police would eventually bring in the woman who claimed to have washed the handkerchief and given it to Freeland, and when asked to identify if that was the same one, she said no. So that threw a massive wrench in things there. The police were dumbfounded as it was. Like, they thought, okay, well, surely this has got to be the handkerchief. Oh, it's not the handkerchief? Well, great. What are we going to do now? To make matters worse, the boys completely recanted their statements that Freeland was the assailant. They said that they kind of felt pressured by the police to pick him. So the entire thing just fell apart right then and there. Oh my gosh. There was one last attempt at finding the attacker in Stillwater, Minnesota. A man who suffered epileptic seizures was just given life in prison for a very similar act, like eerily similar. He would later say, like, he had also killed someone and shoved a handkerchief down their throat. And he would later say to a newspaper something along the lines of, well, I guess I killed that boy in Milwaukee, but I don't remember a thing. After further police questioning, they determined it couldn't have been him at all. So it's just a complete coincidence. So the case was never closed, and now all of the physical evidence is missing too. Like, they don't even have this handkerchief anymore. Meaning that there will likely never be a solution to just this bizarre manhunt. 100 years and no closure. Like, Buddy's parents have been well past for a while now, and their grandchildren probably don't even know about what, I mean, maybe they do, maybe their great grandchildren don't even know what would have happened to their no, not grandpa, but you know what I'm saying. That's just crazy. Whew. So we got through, what is that? 3 weird true crime stories. But let's get to one that has maybe a little bit of a hint of police cover-up, shall I say? Oh, this is interesting. This gets interesting. This is probably, a good time to say, hey, any government body listening, I'm not making accusations one way or another. I'm not one to scatter ashes, but I'm just telling a story. This is all post-ironic humor and not to be taken seriously, and you shouldn't take this seriously, and I should not go to jail for libel or anything if that becomes an issue. That should cover the bases. All right. We're gonna go, what is that? We're gonna go westward a little bit, maybe a little north, but mostly westward to La Crosse, Wisconsin, where the police may be covering up a serial killer. Whoa! Again, government, this is post-ironic humor. I don't actually mean that. Yeah, please don't. But anyway, La Crosse is like many mid-sized towns in Wisconsin. They've got a state university, which is UW La Crosse. Of course, have a very heavy drinking scene, and also home to one of my favorite beverages of all time, LaCroix. The story here starts off with not the second to most recent victim from this town. When I wrote this, it says the most recent victim, but I completely contradict that a little later. So it's the second to most recent victim. And this might be a part of a string of serial murders across the country, as a matter of fact. If you've heard of the smiley face killers, this is a case involved with the theory of these smiley face killers. For those who haven't heard of them, the smiley face killers, or I guess the smiley face killings in what I'm about to say, the killers, I guess, are either a roaming gang or just a bunch of copycats across the country, or complete coincidences where smiley faces are spray painted near the murder site of where usually a college-age, athletic, white, conventionally attractive, and intoxicated young man has drowned. So that's cool. Or at least in this case, I'm But talk about it was set up to look like that. Whoa. Luke Homan. He's originally from near my neck of the woods and went westward to attend UW La Crosse to play basketball, where he was quite the talk of the town for his hooping. You know, this was back in 2006, and of course it was no minor thing to see a quirked up white boy with a little bit of swag balling out. That's the dumbest thing I've ever said. Now, one night, Luke and two of his friends would host a party at their place in celebration of Oktoberfest. If you don't know what Oktoberfest is, it's basically this holiday that mostly consists of getting gobsmacked beyond comprehension. And they decided that after their party, they would go bar hopping. That was mistake number one. Luke and the gang would end up in a notorious spot where several men fitting Luke's exact demographic, I guess, his exact specifications, would meet their untimely demise. 3rd Street. He would find himself separated from his initial group, talking with this fella, and who would be kind of in and out involved with this investigation, and there were some weird overlaps, but I really don't think he had anything to do with it. And by the time morning rolled around, he was a no-show to the charity golf outing he was supposed to attend. He didn't give any sort of heads up, like if he was just too hungover, like his friends expected him to just say, like, hey, not feeling well, I'm going to slam an IV packet and sleep this off. But there was nothing. Completely out of character. They spent the whole day looking for him, and eventually went to the police to file a missing persons report. They would find his phone, I think, by his bed, but that was it. The police would go to the last bar that they had seen Luke at, called The Vibe, and for some reason ask about the band playing. I guess they just really liked bar rock and wanted to know where they could catch the next show of the up-and-coming local band that was never making it out of the state. Nonetheless, the search continued. After discussing an altercation at the bar that turned up nothing, the police were able to use their dogs to track Luke to nearby Riverside Park near the Mississippi that runs through the state. So the Mississippi River starts, I think it's up in the Dakotas, and then comes through Minnesota, and then runs through Wisconsin, and then runs all the way down. They used dogs to scent Luke, and they brought him to the river, and cadaver dogs would then find his body at the bottom of the body of water. Why did I say it like that? I don't know. I just felt like it. Now, anybody who follows any sort of true crime might think, why wasn't the body floating? Now, that is a valid question, but it's a how do I put this? Let's see. Bodies washing up because they're floating is a common occurrence. Like, that's how you get bodies washed up on shore. But there is an old saying that applies to many bodies of water in that area. Lake Superior never gives up her dead. So the constant running cold water never allowed for the bacteria buildup during the body's decomposition. That the bacteria buildup creates a gas buildup, which causes the body to float to the top. But the Mississippi River at this point, this is late September, it was really cold, and the body was just very well preserved while it was underwater. Because of how cold it was. You can tell I'm starting to lose it. Let's see how long I've been recording. Good gravy, it's been almost an hour. Holy cow, this is going to be the longest episode I've ever done. See, there was so much that I had to fit in this, and I'm a little over halfway. This is going to be a long episode. I'm kind of losing it a bit. When they dragged Luke's body up to the shore, it was covered in abrasions and bruises and a pressure wound along his forehead. His biceps and knuckles and right side were all messed with. And now all these wounds are red, which means that they had to have been sustained before he died. That's a common thing. Red wounds mean that they happened before he died. Blue means after. Now, where this takes a bigger turn is the police refusing to state whether or not the body had water in the lungs at the time of death. Water in the lungs would mean that it was likely an accidental drowning because he was drunk. And without water means that it was probably something more sinister. But the police just didn't say anything because they might be covering something up. Whoa. You'd think the police would be quick to try to dispel any rumors of a serial killer striking La Crosse, but there was nary a peep from the authorities. Very strange, considering there are many community members who staunchly defend the idea that this and several of the quote-unquote accidental drownings were very intentional. Now, looking further into Luke's body, the pressure wound on his forehead looked to be from a boot. Not only was this just any boot, but it was a boot with a more narrow toe line, meaning that this was likely a woman's boot, meaning that this was a killer, it was probably a female killer. He even had wounds on his wrists, implying that his hands could have been tied up. There were flecks of this orange fluorescent material on his clothes, which tied together with an orange smiley face spray painted on a nearby road, which is why this could be a smiley face killing. If the smiley face killers are even a real group, there's actually a lot of debate, and that all the smiley face paintings could just be coincidence. I don't really know what to believe either way on that. Now, some might posit that this was still an accident, and this is why I don't think so. Before Luke, there were 11 other young men who drowned in the river under the influence of alcohol. The most recent, before Luke, was 2004. Luke knew these stories, hated swimming, and told his parents explicitly that he was not going to go anywhere near the water because he knew of these stories. You also have to factor in how you get to the river from the Vibe, the bar that he was last seen at. He had to go literally the opposite direction from where he lived, which was most likely where he would have been heading when he left, because he had to get up in the morning to go to this charity golf outing. Now, La Crosse, like many Midwestern cities, is laid out in a grid pattern, so it wouldn't have been hard to go where he needed to go, even if he was completely plastered. So then, what prompted him to go in the opposite direction, even if he was not planning on going home? This is where we go back to the 11 other cases, including one exactly a year after Luke's death. They are all eerily similar to this one. All the victims fit the same profile, were intoxicated at the time of their death, and were found in or near the river. 5 of these victims were seen on 3rd Street and found either downstream about a mile, either at or downstream about a mile from the park. See, I'm losing it. I can't even read these words and record. This is the longest I've recorded, I think, a podcast so far. Now, these 5 killings in particular are more likely to be connected than the other 6, but the other 6 are great cover that leaves some room for doubt. You know, as always, the most dangerous lie has a little itty-bitty hint of truth in it. Considering the running theory is that the killer was female, Luke was single and intoxicated, I imagine he was likely approached by a woman at the bar and planned to meet her at the nearby park a little later at the night. This woman was probably, more like some sort of black widow, not exactly, of course, but kind of like it, who maybe, I would posit the idea maybe she knocked Luke out, tied him up, stepped on his forehead just to make sure he was out, and then because of the missing belt loop on his pants, hoisted him up by the waist and threw him into the river. And if there's one thing that I think would get a heavily intoxicated young man to ignore any and all of his inhibitions, it's probably meeting a pretty lady. Like, that's just what it is. A female serial killer would also get overlooked more often than not because they are generally only 5 to 10% of the demographic. The rest of, the 95 to 90% are males. So overall, any sort of ties to the smiley face killers is kind of dubious. as 8 of the aforementioned cases in La Crosse were not tied to the alleged gang, but Luke's was the only one to have any sort of link to the spray paint. So was it smiley face killers? I don't know. I don't even know if they fully exist. But I do think that several of those deaths were connected. Now, the reason that this has potential for police cover-up is how independent investigators talk about their interactions with the La Crosse police trying to get information on this case. There is, little to no cooperation, and what reasoning is provided for the deaths is just malarkey at best. So once again, I am not going to actually make this claim, but come to your own conclusions. What is interesting, though, this whole thing is interesting, but there is a rather large homeless population in a homeless camp in a very similar area. Of course, illegal substances and alcohol are very popular there, yet none of them have fallen into the river, implying that there was some sort of force that moved at least some of these young men into the water by themselves, either dead or alive at the time. You also have a very similar phenomenon happening right now in Chicago, where there's been some sort of epidemic of young men dying, allegedly drowning in the Chicago River and off the coast of Lake Michigan. Of course, it's not unfeasible to get to Chicago from La Crosse. If this was, one killer who's just moving about, it's about a 4.5-hour drive and maybe an hour-long flight. So if you were Taylor Swift, of course, you would take the flight, but I think most normal people would just drive. All these cases could easily string together from nearly 40 years ago to today, hiding under the guise of these young men just being inebriated and dying tragic deaths by accidental drownings. But I don't think that's the case. All right. I think we've gotten through all the heavy stuff. An hour and 6 minutes into this thing. We got a few more. Let's see. 1, 2. We got 3 more things. They're all a little bit more lighthearted. They're all fun. So let's talk about the town that does not, maybe it does, kind of, sort of, exist. Doveland, Wisconsin. As the story goes, near central Wisconsin, there was a town named Doveland. It was likely a small, barely incorporated area like Clyman or Lowell, or any of the other very small farming communities up north. They all look the same and have the same singular downtown with buildings that haven't been renovated and were, built in the 40s. Half of them are completely abandoned or, in disrepair. The most popular place in town is the BP gas station, and all the town hall meetings have maybe 10 people if you're lucky, all over the age of 75. But allegedly, in the 90s, this town just up and vanished. Again, allegedly, because, if you look at any map of the state, there is no record of Doveland, at all, not even pre-90s. The one way that this adds up to Doveland, even existing for a little bit, was that it was unincorporated territory with no major landmarks, so it was just small enough not to show up on any maps. But I don't really buy that. The evidence that points to it having existed at all, is just pithy and depends on people claiming to remember the town, having visited, or said that they had family who lived there. But from all the people I've asked, I know people who have lived in Wisconsin their entire lives, nobody remembers Doveland at all. What makes Doveland fascinating to me is, not only that it's a big conspiracy from Wisconsin, and not exactly the concept of a city vanishing, although ghost towns are very cool. But it's that people have collectively gaslit themselves into believing that Doveland was real and just disappeared. I'm sorry, Doveland did not exist. If you want to believe it did, be my guest, more power to you. But it just didn't. Doveland was never a thing. But there are a bunch of people who believe it did. It existed. don't you can gaslight yourself into believing some things, and sometimes that's helpful, but something like this, just don't even waste your time. But now, more town-specific lore is the mysterious booms that happened in Clintonville, which is a small town near Green Bay. One night, there were just really large booms that started rattling the entire town, and nobody knew their origin. Several people said that they sounded like, someone is taking a wrecking ball through the side of their house, or driving like a large semi-truck through their walls. This lasted for several days in the spring of 2012, and Public Works got started on trying to find the cause. I remember when this happened, actually. And we were all just fascinated, like, what could possibly be causing that? Like, an earthquake, maybe, but that doesn't really happen in that region of the world. That was my last sip of my Vitalife Organic Kombucha Berry Nirvana Sparkling Fermented Tea with 5 probiotic cultures. So the Public Works investigated, and there were no, exploding gas lines, no burping in the sewer system. Underground explosions and electrical problems had also been ruled out. The city kind of defaulted to the cause being an earthquake eventually, although that would then be ruled out. The thing is, the seismic station near the town, it was recording underground activity, but nothing strong enough to qualify as an earthquake. So it was definitely coming from the ground. It wasn't happening, like in the sky or anything. It's not like there was a big dog fight happening in the sky and they just couldn't see it. But, of course, I want to say, it's caused by the giants in Hollow Earth throwing a party and just jumping a bit too high. But I don't think that theory would ever catch on. In all reality, there's never been a reasonable explanation for these strange random booms that exclusively happen either at night or in the early hours of the morning. We just, to this day, don't know, and it's been since 2012. I really want to know if this has happened anywhere else, and they have some sort of explanation for it, but Clintonville is just... There's nothing to go on. There's nothing to go on. They've ruled out any possible explanation. As far as we know, they were just things exploding underground. But anyway, we will wrap up with a funky folklore story of a popular cryptid. The biggest cryptid from the state of Wisconsin is the hodag. The hodag made Rhinelander famous. You might have heard of this critter because apparently he's pretty recognizable. As the story goes, the hodag was first discovered by a local land surveyor, Eugene Shepard. He's going up north in a trail and was stopped dead in his tracks by what he described as an awful odor. As he went further down the trail, he discovered green and black fur scattered about. Venturing even further into the woods, he noticed claw marks about 7 feet up a tree. This, of course, seemed strange and got even weirder when he discovered a hole dug into the side of a hill. Eugene, always game for a good story, rounded up a whole posse of lumberjacks from an area called the Hollow, which was mostly, saloons and other provisionary stations, and took this newly formed lumberjack gang alongside their white bulldog, which they had for protection, back up the trail to investigate this hole. They brought a pike pole, which is basically just this long pole used to move lumber around, and put a chloroform sponge at the end of it to sedate whatever creature was waiting for them in the hole. So Eugene himself claimed to have gotten down on his hands and knees and reached into the little cavern, pulling out this mysterious being. And as the legend goes, as soon as it saw the light, the hodag's eyes shot open and it sprung up on the group of men. Its attention would then turn to the white bulldog, which it ate in a single bite. Now, legend says that this is what gave this beast a taste for specifically white bulldogs ever since. The creature they uncovered had sort of a prehistoric figure to it. It was covered in black and green fur, had bright glowing eyes, and had horns like an oxen and tusks for teeth. Along its back, it had 12 horns that went down its spine all the way to the end of its tail. This is when they would decide to name this gremlin the Hodag. If you look it up, there are plenty of pictures of what this thing looks like if my description was bad, because it probably was. It's an interesting looking critter, and it's even on the little emblem that the local police use. Rhinelander is proud to be home of the Hodag. Eugene would eventually take the Hodag back to his property and would chain it up in a little pit that he dug and built a stone covering on top of. These structures are actually still there today, along a bit behind this greenhouse that is now affectionately known as the Hodag House. But one morning, Eugene went out to try to feed it, and the chain had snapped, and the beast was gone. There was a trail that followed back to the nearby river, which it had presumably swam across and made its way back into the forest. Now, you'll hear stories from the classic crazy town coot who claims to have seen the thing, and as much as I'm inclined to believe such a tale, I don't think I can, unfortunately. This story likely takes inspiration from a creature that the local natives worshipped. It looked similar to the description of the Hodag, and whether or not this native god also ate white bulldogs, I can't say. But to this day, they have a saying that because of the Hodag, you will never see a white bulldog in Rhinelander, which is pretty cool. But, I'm going to slap the knee and say, well, I think that's just about time to end it. About time for me to get out of here. About time for you to get out of here and stop listening to me ramble. If you're here and this is the first episode you listen, take a gander at some of my other episodes, leave a like, tell me which story was your favorite, and if you want to hear more state-specific episodes, I think that would be cool and fairly easy to track down information on it. And remember, this is all post-irony. It cannot be held, I cannot be held responsible for anything said here to the CIA. It's all a joke. Before I do go, I will make good on my promise of saying something in a Midwest accent, even though it's not fully. I said I would do the whole episode in one. There's no way I was going to do it. So if you want to get into, knowing how to do it, just start saying grocery bag. You have to. It's not bag. It's bag. Bag. Grocery bag. Once you get into saying grocery bag enough times, you can say, oh, let me just sneak right by you there and grab that ranch. All right? That's the most you're getting out of me because it sounds so dumb. Anyway, that's it. Goodbye. I love you.